Good morning, everybody, or all three of you. The early session on the last day of the meeting is usually a challenge. I'm Alan Perlman from Seattle, and I'm pleased to co-chair with Evstathia Andrikopoulou, who I learned the other day is going to be from Seattle next month. So we have an interesting and I think forward-looking session on AI and machine learning. I learned quite recently that the fourth speaker isn't going to be able to present today, and so we have a little bit more time, and we'll have a little time for questions and answers. I do want to make sure, however, that this session ends at 7:50 because the Feigenbaum lecture and young investigator presentations happen starting at 8, and I want people to be able to get to that. So let me introduce the first speaker, who probably does not need an introduction, Patricia Pellikka, who's a past president of this ASE and current editor-in-chief of JACE from the Mayo Clinic, and she will present an automated echocardiographic detection of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction using artificial intelligence. Dr. Pellikka.
Thank you, chairpersons, esteemed colleagues. It's my pleasure to present on behalf of my colleagues our work. Automated echocardiographic detection of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction using artificial intelligence. This research was supported by a grant from the American Society of Echocardiography Foundation, as well as additional support from Ultromics Limited and Mayo Clinic. The detection of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction involves integration of multiple imaging and clinical features, but these are often discordant or indeterminate. We hypothesized that we could apply artificial intelligence to detect HFpEF from a single apical 4-chamber transthoracic echo video clip, and that the accuracy of the model would be better than our clinical scores. Indeed, there's a lot of information in the apical 4-chamber view about chamber sizes, motion of the annulus, and other features that we thought might unlock the answer to HFpEF. The three-dimensional convolutional neural network was developed and trained on apical 4-chamber video clips. We identified a population, the HFpEF population, which included patients with a diagnosis of heart failure, ejection fraction greater than or equal to 50%, and echo evidence of increased filling pressure. The control group without HFpEF were patients with no diagnosis of heart failure, ejection fraction greater than or equal to 50%, and normal filling pressure by echo. There were about 3,700 patients in the first group and nearly 3,000 controls. 17% were held out for validation. The model training and validation were completed using Python with TensorFlow, and model inputs consisted only of the apical 4-chamber video clips. The convolutional neural network model was applied to the apical 4-chamber video clips, and the model was composed of 3 series of 3-dimensional convolutional layers, each a sequence of 2 convolutions followed by batch normalization, then 1 max pooling operation. This architecture was chosen because it is well suited to operate on 3-dimensional data. All 4-chamber video clips were subjected to an automated image pre-processing prior to being fed into the neural network, and that included extraction of the DICOM ultrasound region and resizing each frame to 256 by 256 pixels. Data augmentation was randomly applied throughout training to improve the generalizability of the model. Softmax activation function was used to calculate a value between 0 and 1, mapped to HFpEF or no HFpEF, and a non-diagnostic output was generated based on model uncertainty. Because we wanted to compare this to clinical models, we looked at the sensitivity and specificity that were reported in the literature. The average of these had a sensitivity of 74% and specificity of 65%. So to demonstrate a 5% increase from this benchmark and to allow for about 20% of non-diagnostic outcomes, we knew that we would need a test group of about 1,050 patients. Multicenter independent testing was used from our retrospective data Mayo Clinic Health System outside of Rochester, Minnesota. Cases and controls were matched for sex and the year of the echocardiogram, and we tried to match them as closely as we could for age. We did upsample in our test group for non-white and Hispanic populations because we wanted to make sure that the model would work in a more diverse population. The results are shown here. Discrimination performance was excellent. The AUROC in the test set was 0.91. Results were non-diagnostic in 7.3%, and the sensitivity in the test group was 88% with a specificity of 82%. Shown here are alluvial plots that compare the clinical HFpEF classification versus our AI model. The clinical scores, and this is HFA-PEFF score, and here the H2-FPEF score. These scores include clinical echo, ECG parameters, and the HFA includes BNP. And then this shows the reclassification when we applied our model to the same echocardiograms. So when applied to our test population, the clinical scores had very high sensitivity and specificity for detection of HFpEF, but large numbers of patients were classified as indeterminate, as shown in pink here. Our model was able to reclassify almost all of these patients that were indeterminate by the clinical models. We also wanted to see if our model could discriminate patients according to survival. And during median follow-up of 2.3 years, 444 of the patients died. You can see, as shown in the Kaplan-Meier survival curves, which were adjusted for age, the mortality was higher in patients classified as HFpEF by AI, as shown in red. The uncertain group was intermediate between the not suggestive of HFpEF and the HFpEF. In conclusion, the novel AI HFpEF model, based on a single routinely acquired echo video, demonstrated excellent discrimination of patients with versus without HFpEF, more often than the HFA-PEFF or H2-FPEF score, and identified patients with higher mortality. The model was approved by the FDA, and we hope that utilization of our AI model in appropriate clinical populations will facilitate non-invasive diagnosis of HFpEF and allow expedited patient care. I'd like to acknowledge the support from the American Society of Echocardiography Foundation and the excellent help from my wonderful collaborators at Ultromics and Mayo Clinic. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.